And with that, I will give the word to Robi Dийн from Teach for All, so he can present a little bit more about the Teach for All network and the NEWTT project. And it will be great if you can write down your questions until during his presentation, or just post them in the chat, so he can answer after that.
Thank you so much, Petko, and congratulations to Teach for Bulgaria for 10 years of impact in education and with students in the Bulgarian context. My name is Robi Dийн. I work as our knowledge lead for research and evaluation here at the Global Network of Teach for All. And I am very pleased to be here today to celebrate your 10-year anniversary, as well as explain a little bit about our network, our goals, and the work that we've done with Teach for Bulgaria and impact evaluation and research in the past. I'll be talking specifically about a policy experiment project that we did with 4 other European countries, in addition to Bulgaria, on attracting new talents into teaching. And explaining a little bit about the research and partnership with the European Union that occurred in 2016 through 2018. And it's with great privilege that I have the opportunity to present to you all today. So thank you again. A little bit about Teach for All. We are a global network with a 25-year vision that by 2040, that communities across the world will enable all their children to have the education, support, and opportunity to shape a better future for themselves and all of us. These communities are inspiring and informing a worldwide movement to achieve this everywhere. And the way that we do that, way that we want to achieve this 25-year vision is that there are 58 or 59 partner organizations across the world that are working to accelerate impact on student level growth, as well as community level progress and leadership development across the world. And we are greatly privileged to work with the Teach for Bulgaria team as one of our partners in this global network of organizations. Some of the shared characteristics of these 59 independently operated and organized partner organizations is that we followed a similar approach to be able to make an immediate impact in classrooms and also a longer-term collective impact in communities. We first recruit promising leaders within the context that each of our partner organizations work. We also partner with communities and schools to be able to commit to a long-term progress for children and place those young leaders into positions to work with students, our most marginalized students across the world, for 2 years. Over the 2 years, we provide and support them with intensive training and also ongoing mentorship and support, all centered around a shared vision for student success, as well as instilling leadership and leadership capabilities in our participants and fellows of our program. Over the 2 years and through multiple instances of working with the most marginalized communities, our network partners cultivate long-term collective leadership among our partner alumni. Those are the individuals who complete their 2 years and go on to work in and around education to ensure that children across the world are making substantial progress and that communities are making progress as well. As a part of our global network of 59 partner organizations, our Teach for All global organization is a conglomerate of more than 130 different staff members that work to support our network partners, identify insights from the work of our partners and share those global insights across the world. And a part of what I do in our global network is support our partners in research. And I'll share some more about our research that we've done over the past several years. And then over time, you will see partners continuing to support communities and making long-term impact within the communities that they are where they are working, in order to ensure that all children are able to fulfill their potential. In terms of our research work, we partner with both independent researchers, academics, research organizations, as well as our partner organizations to pursue research questions across our theory of change. The majority of our research has focused on our short-term impact around our approach to recruit, place, support, and develop and cultivate leaders. We are also doing more and more research around what are the effects of our partner organizations on the leadership development of our fellows, in addition to how we are cultivating collective leadership. We are also beginning to do more research on the impact of our global network in terms of adapting and sharing solutions, and what role does the network approach play in cultivating local level leadership. And in partners where there have been significant presence and progress in communities, we're beginning to research how partners have made significant aggregate level, student level progress within specific communities where they are working. And so our research agenda is growing, and we're always looking to partner with new researchers who have interest in exploring some of these very challenging questions. And one of our biggest examples of this over the past several years was a partnership that we had with a policy experiment for our European partner organizations. We want to first kind of set, what was the theory of problem that the research partnership that we explored was aiming to address. And what I'd like to do, instead of talking to you about this, we have a short video that explains the policy experiment and the overall intentions. And then I'll jump into a little bit about what we learned from the research approach. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the video. Just bear with me one moment. Can you all see my screen with the video, or do you still see my slides? Petco?
Is it the map? I think it's the video.
It's the video? Okay, wonderful.
Today, the teaching profession in Europe is facing many challenges. A lack of interest in the profession, coupled with an increase in average teaching age, and inability to respond adequately to the teaching needs of the 21st century. Insufficient practical training and development of academic teachers leading them to leave the profession. And inability to integrate students.
Is it meant to have an audio?
Thank you. Yes.
Here.
I just received a message that the audio wasn't working. So let me switch to the apologies.
Today, the teaching profession in Europe is a lack of interest in the profession, coupled with an increase in average teaching age, and inability to respond adequately to the teaching needs of the 21st century.
Are we still having issues with the audio?
Yeah, I think it's just playing from your speakers, and it's not very good.
Oh, okay. Well, then let's go ahead and resort to the overview explanation, and then I'll jump in and I will share with you all this video in the chat so that you can learn more about the experiment that we did together. Apologies, I'm going to switch back to my presentation. So the video was trying to explain a shared challenges across the European context with an overall lack of interest in the teaching profession, an overall increase in teacher age, a inability to respond adequately to the changing needs of 21st century learning, and insufficient practical training of beginning teachers leading to leaving the profession early on. We worked really closely with both our government partners across 5 different contexts across the European Union, as well as our European Commission partners to identify a shared policy solution to help address some of these problems. And the policy that we developed is called A New Way for Talents in Teaching. It is a consortium of 5 different European states and countries: Bulgaria, Romania, Austria, Latvia, and the Basque Country in Spain, and an independent evaluation of the policy conducted by our university partners at the University of Duisburg-Essen in Germany, led by Dr. Aman Yosef Abs. This was a 3-year policy experiment in that we created alternative pathways into teaching and provided ongoing support to those teachers over the course of 2 years, and at different intervals conducted research on different research questions to be able to understand how effective the policy experiment was. And some of those major research questions that we explored are partner organizations' recruitment and selection strategies actually bringing in new talent into the workforce? What are some of the characteristics of those fellows that are coming in? We also wanted to understand the efficacy and the effectiveness of our fellows. One of the ways that we did that was to understand the perceptions of the effectiveness of our fellows by head teachers and principals. We also asked, how do fellows' opportunities to learn and develop differ from those that do not go through this type of ongoing training and support? And we then asked what types of competencies and skills are developed over the course of the 2 years, and how are those different from more traditional pathways into teaching? The way we set this up was through a 2-year longitudinal study with 5 different country sites. And some of the key results that we found is that there were different motivations for entering the teaching profession for those that entered the program through programs like Teach for Bulgaria and the Teach for All partner organization network. They were more inclined to join because of a sense of social responsibility, whereas traditionally trained teachers were generally more inclined for a sense of job security and stability. We found that there was very high satisfaction rates across the different principals who we interviewed and surveyed. In fact, more than 95% of them said that they would take on an additional fellow because of their perceived effectiveness in the classroom. We also measured different competencies related to teacher pedagogical skills and training. We used international pedagogical tests and found that the intervention groups, or those fellows that entered the program through a Teach for All partner organization, were significantly more likely to have seen differential increases in their pedagogical skills over time, over the 2 years of their ongoing support as compared to other traditionally trained teachers. We found that they had generally more opportunities to reflect, to opportunities for learning through peer-to-peer collaboration. And then in Bulgaria specifically, I wanted to show this data where we surveyed and spoke to more than 19 principals who said overall 100% of them would take another fellow from Teach for Bulgaria to operate in their school. That the vast majority of them said that they were an adequate fit for their needs in the school. We also show that Teach for Bulgaria participants were significantly more likely to have reflection conversations with a trainer and or a mentor, and that they were significantly more likely to have received feedback opportunities from those mentors as well. And in terms of competencies, in terms of teaching, we show that Teach for Bulgaria participants, as compared to a comparison group of teachers from traditionally trained pathways, were more likely to score higher on international pedagogical standards exams. So in summary, some of the evidence that we have from the new ways of talent into teaching policy experiment was that across the different partner organizations and country sites, that it was successful in attracting promising leaders into the system, into education, that prior to entering the classroom, Teach for All fellows developed as much, if not more, pedagogical knowledge and competency as traditionally trained teachers, and that the participants reported that in-service mentoring and pre-service training provided them more opportunities to learn and develop compared to traditionally trained teachers, as well as over 85% of all head teachers across the European countries where we worked saw that the project provided an important addition to their schools. And in reflecting back on what we've learned from this experiment over the past 2 years in completion of NEWTT, we've seen the European Commission and the European Union inviting Teach for All, our partner organizations, into spaces, into panels, into briefs to discuss with high-level public authorities on more policy experiments for alternative pathways into teaching. In Bulgaria, I learned very recently that a new Ministry of Education initiative called the National Program for Motivated Teachers was in part inspired by our results from the NEWTT program that is currently administered by both the Bulgarian Union of Teachers as well as Teach for Bulgaria, and that there are currently 102 teachers working from alternative certification pathways into teaching in the current Bulgarian system. So I hope this gives you a small taste of some of the evidence that we've generated over the past several years in partnership with our Teach for Bulgaria team, and I'll be happy to answer any questions moving forward. And I apologize for technical difficulties.
Thank you, Robbie. I want to start with a question that I have. You have more experience working with, I guess, research and impact evaluation in other Teach for All partners. Is it a common practice that based on finding or a report, something similar like this will become a national policy, or is this more rare to happen?
So Pekka, if I understand your question correctly, is from our experience with other projects that have looked into these questions around the efficacy of new ways into teaching, have these experienced kind of growth into scale and national policies?
Yeah.
I think that the NEWTT example is perhaps the most salient example of a strong partnership between both government and social and civil society organizations working to help address issues with teacher recruitment, teacher motivation, and teacher skills that I've seen across the Teach for All partner organizations across the world. The fact that we have strong partnerships across 5 of our different partner organizations and country sites that enabled deep collaboration with both the ministries of education, other local municipal and regional ministries of education, as well as traditional training programs and universities, kind of demonstrates the shared challenges and also the hope to work together to encounter a shared solution. So this is, I think, a very unique example from how we've worked together to create a large-scale policy across such a broad set of diverse governments and nonprofit organizations. There are a few other examples. There's been a lot of, research within Teach for America, where the U.S. Department of Education has, asked questions of how they can support the scaling of efforts to bring in more teachers into the system there. But that, I think, is one of the few other examples where I've seen that type of deep partnership with the government to answer these types of questions.
Great. And we have one question from Joanna. How are you building the 2040 plan? Are you using any strategic foresighting tools?
That's a great question. And I would very much encourage you to visit our website at www.teachforall.org, and that we explain kind of our vision for 2040 and our 25-year vision, as well as the 10-year intended outcomes that we are measuring progress against. As a global network, we have 5 large intended outcomes that we are hoping to make progress towards as a strategic framework for our work. Those include an intended outcome around community level progress, another intended outcome related to creating and developing an extraordinary breadth of leadership in the system across the world, as well as providing an excellent education to students and improving upon a broad set of student outcomes, both academic and non-academic outcomes, as well as creating an interconnected community of practitioners, and finally influencing the global dialogue around the importance of interventions in educational equity.
Thanks so much, Robbie. It's an excellent answer to my question. I just wanted to say congratulations on all the work that you've done and that Teach for Bulgaria have done as well, and congratulations on the 10-year anniversary. I'm definitely going to look further onto that subject on the website. Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Great. We have a couple of more minutes, maybe 1 or 2 more questions from the audience for Robbie.
I have a question, if I may. So as an observer, do you see any kind of similarities with the other Teach for All that you just mentioned? Do we have some similar challenges that we're facing with them? And are there any lessons learned that we can try and use so that we can get better next year and the years coming?
I think that there's so many large learning questions that we have as a network that we're still actively exploring. Like, what are the associated factors to developing programs that have long-lasting community level progress? That's of top of mind. What role does collective leadership play into making community level progress across the world and within specific countries? And then how do we develop collective leadership, not just of our fellows, but those in and around the education sector to kind of devote themselves to education and continue to work toward educational progress? Those are some of the top of mind questions that I have, and how can we develop the capacity of local leaders, of a diverse set of leaders that are from the communities where we're working, and enlist them in this movement toward educational equity, as they will be the leaders in this movement in the future. So I think those are some of the big questions that I think we're grappling with as a network. And I know that many of our partners are doing lots of cool innovations in and around those questions moving forward.
Okay, so I guess if there's no more questions, we can continue. But before that, I just want to spend like 1 minute to thank everyone that gave comments and helped for all of the reports and the studies that we are presenting now. And of course, I want to thank our long-term partner, the America for Bulgaria Foundation, that without them, nothing of this would be possible. So they have been incredible support in the last 10 years, not only financially, but with all of the support and help from them, so we can do our programs and of course do the research and the hopefully impact that we are having over the educational system. And with that, I guess I will give the word to sorry. And with that, I guess I will give the word to Boyan Zakharev, so he can present the findings of the added value study that he and his team did.
Thank you, Petko. Let me first start by thanking the team of Teach for Bulgaria. It was a pleasure working with them, though it was already some time ago. But I greatly appreciate the fact that they are very receptive to any kind of results. They would accept either good or bad news about the evaluation we were doing. And this is a clear sign that a team is ready to change their program, their ideas, and to innovate. And I think this is even more valuable than the evaluation itself. So let me briefly introduce what we did. I don't have a fancy presentation, just some notes. During the pandemic, I end up in a place which is not particularly high tech. So I did what I could, and Petko asked me just to explain in a very plain and simple language what we did. So I will share for a while my screen, but it's just a simple PDF with just three things: a few words about the methodology, a few words about the scope of what we did, and a few words about the results. So as Petko already told, I hope you are seeing now the text on my screen. Okay, it's a quantitative survey evaluation. I would say a classical one, just the kind of evaluation that produces black and white kind of results. That's, by the way, one of the reasons why this kind of research is often criticized, but it is very well accepted by the policy community, including by governments, including by the Bulgarian government. It's used by the World Bank. So it's very natural that a program might want to also have this kind of evaluation. But I want to especially emphasize that it's very important not to have only this kind of evaluation and to have all these surveys going deeply into the teaching profession, into the feelings, the motivation, the choices that people make. The kind of data that Robi information that Robi just presented. I'm saying this because very often some evaluations, they just end up with quantitative measures of whatever, which is definitely not enough to capture the complexity of education and of teaching. So what we did, like in every quantitative evaluation, we had to choose a suitable measure of performance. In this case, it was the value added. It's a very popular measure, as Petko already mentioned. Value added, put in simple words, it's the progress that a student makes between two successive tests, not just taking scores from one single test, but capturing the progress, and not just the progress of the specific student, but the progress, I would say, at the background of the progress made by every other student. So within the overall distribution of results between tests that a pool of students usually make. So what we used, we had the chance to get data from national external tests in Bulgaria, standardized tests, after grade 4, 7, and 12. And this was for a period of 5 years, starting in 2010 and ending in 2015. And this is actually the period of our evaluation. So what we got from our government, from our Ministry of Education, is practically the test score for this period from the external test for every student in Bulgaria that was present to the test. It's a huge data set. Here is how it looks. For example, these are scores from 2010 for many students. Here you can see the scores. It's Bulgarian language, mathematics, and so on and so on, all the way down to more than 700,000. And this is it's not that we have 700,000 students, it's the score for every student on every subject. And in 2010, and it's in another examination that took place later. But still, it's a very, very big data set. We covered 5 areas: Bulgarian language, mathematics. In our system, it's called Bulgarian language and literature, because they also study literature at the same time. Mathematics, natural sciences, including physics, chemistry, biology, similar subject, humanities, and foreign languages for the students in the upper secondary education. This is the first step, running a big regression and getting those scores for every student, value-added scores for every student in Bulgaria. And the second step was to check whether at the end of the day, students taught by teachers from Teach for Bulgaria performed better. And to do this, we had to somehow find similar examples, similar schools in our case, to the schools that were chosen by Teach for Bulgaria. And we use a statistical technique called Propensity Score. It boils down to the following. You just take a number of dimensions like socioeconomic environment, like the size of the school, the ratio teachers to students, and many others. I think we chose about 12 or 13. And then based on those dimensions, you find among all the other schools in Bulgaria, those that match best the schools chosen by Teach for Bulgaria. And then it's simple. You have to compare value added of students in those schools to the schools of Teach for Bulgaria. By schools of Teach for Bulgaria, I mean a school in which there was a teacher teaching, a teacher trained and placed there by Teach for Bulgaria. And one final detail, we use the scores exactly from those subjects where the teacher of Teach for Bulgaria was teaching. So we were comparing comparable scores. You see that we covered about 4,800 plus students that had a teacher from Teach for Bulgaria. We covered several examinations, pairs of examinations. You can see them here. We covered a total of more than 100 teachers of Teach for Bulgaria. And to check their performance, we matched schools and, of course, teachers in those schools from all the remaining more than 2,000 schools in Bulgaria. This is the scope of the whole evaluation. So what did we find? I've marked here in green positive results, and in red the few negative results that we found. I would just to give you an impression, I just run all the way down to the bottom of the table. We found a negative result only in 2 cases out of very many examples of positive results, including not only student performance. I forgot to say that based on our data set, having a pair of examinations, we could also trace how many students disappeared between the first and the second. They disappeared from the whole education system, not just from a specific school, because we had data for all students. So we could also estimate a kind of a proxy for school dropout. And with this proxy, Teach for Bulgaria had a very positive result all across. And they had a very positive results on most of the paired examinations, on most of the subjects, especially natural sciences and mathematics, with a very few exceptions. Like you see one pair of examination in mathematics, where when we take all the schools, they had a negative results, but when we took the smaller schools, they still had a very positive result. Of course, it's natural when you teach a large group of more than 100 teachers, you cannot expect that every teacher with every kind of students in every school will be a success. It's important that the program as a whole brings value to the system. And here we can see this very clearly. And I have to emphasize that with mathematics and natural sciences, we see some of the best results. Finally, and this is my final point, we also checked the ability of Teach for Bulgaria to predict performance for their teachers, because at that time, the program had a very intricate procedure to select, to choose who their teachers, because there were a lot of candidates, I think, for the job. So it was interesting to see whether their internal scoring system, very refined, was good in predicting, particularly value added, because this is what we were evaluating. I should specifically say that I don't believe that a system for teacher selection should only care about value added. This is not true. We just check this to give some impression, and we find that the scoring system used by Teach for Bulgaria was very good in predicting the value added, especially in mathematics and in natural sciences, but not so good in other subjects that are less technical, like the language. So without making some big implications out of this, I would say that it gives some food for thought about the system of selecting. It was based on a very strict scoring, like our assessment was. This doesn't tell you that there were bad teachers in the Bulgarian language. It could be that the system that Teach for Bulgaria used was better. I'm just saying that it was not correlated with the value added measure of performance, and that's all. So in general, we found very positive messages from a kind of evaluation, quantitative evaluation that, as I said at the beginning, produces black and white results that you cannot change, you cannot influence, you can just interpret. So I think this was, and it was the first 5 years more or less of the programs. So I believe it was a good message, and I'm happy that we had the chance to work together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Boyan. And now I'll open for any questions. I see that we have our first question from Maya. Are there any plans for similar assessment of more recent external evaluations?
Is this a question?
Yeah, it's a question.
Well, I should say that this was the last one that that we did of this magnitude and scope. And one of the reasons is also that due to changes in legislation, it became very difficult to get access to this kind of big data. Actually, we tried to replicate it later, but it was no longer possible with the new EU legislation. So unfortunately, now you have to invest in collecting your own data in a way, which is of course very, very expensive and laborious. But what to do? So this was really the last one of this kind, and we haven't done anything like that since then. We did smaller evaluations based on data collected by organizations themselves, but nothing of this magnitude.
Yeah, and I just want to add that we would gladly like run such an analysis again if somehow we can get the data on the student level, but this can be challenging because of the recent policy changes about privacy and so on. I see Ivo. Ivo has been raising his hand. Maybe he wants to ask a question.
Hello. My name is Ivo. I'm working for ABF, America for Bulgaria Foundation. Boyan, thank you very much for the presentation. As you know, I'm quite interested in this quasi-experimental design, very complex work. So congratulations. I have one methodological question, and now I would like to ask it. So let me see if I understand correctly. So for example, you have one TFB teacher in a given school, and you take the results of all students in that given grade and compare these results with another comparison school. Is that right? And if this is correct, what concerns me is the fact that you assume that the impact and the effect of this given TFB teacher is actually on the whole other group and the whole other students in the different classes that have different teachers. Mm-hmm. Isn't it this a very big assumption and a methodological issue?
Yes, actually, Ivo, you're completely right. It is one of the assumptions. However, in this case, it was not so dramatic because teachers, we check this, of course, for every specific school, but once a school hired a teacher in something, the teacher used to teach the whole group of students, all the classes within a grade. There were exceptions, of course, but the coverage in this respect was very, very high. And in other schools, of course, we only took the same cohort of students, not the whole school, just the same cohort and their results on exactly the same subjects. But still, even with what I say now, some additional uncertainty in the data remains, as you correctly point out. But this, the propensity score methodology, it can work with small groups of matched individuals or schools or whatever, and it has very robust methods for checking whether the difference is significant, whether it's not due to chance in this sense. So with the combination of these two explanations, I think that the results are still quite reliable and can be trusted. And the peer reviewers who had experience in this also thought that results can be trusted.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have a quick question again from Joanna. Do you also benchmark against other countries, or perhaps this isn't relevant? In this case, we only benchmark in Bulgaria because it was important that the students went through the same exams, and we can kind of match the TFB students and other students. So in this case, we only benchmark against Bulgarian students.
Yeah, as you said, it's only against all other Bulgarian students of the same cohort who appeared on the examinations. It's very interesting to conduct international comparison, but this is only possible with data from international surveys, such as PISA, that have the same methodology and that apply it consistently across different countries. It's a very, very interesting and challenging field of research. By the way, a lot of those programs provide open access to their data. So it's not a bad idea to explore possibilities to use them for program assessment in the future.
Yeah, and we have one more question from Christomanov. Would you please explain in a bit more detail the quantitative results you showed in your notes? For example, what was the average percentage improvement in the TFB student cohorts versus the control groups?
Well, I could do that, but it will take longer, and then I will not keep my promise to not go into technicalities. These are value-added scores, which are intuitively the scores that appear on the right-hand side with a positive sign. It means that students in the Teach for Bulgaria, Teach for schools with teachers for Teach for Bulgaria had more value added. So it's not just value added, it's more value added, an excess of value added. And in directly interpreting these scores by just looking at the numbers doesn't make sense. So I would reply this in more detail in writing if or have a special meeting with us guys that are more interested in such kind of technicalities, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. And I also want to add that after the webinar, except the, I will send the recording, of course, but I will also send summarized information about the reports and the studies, as well as the reports in their full text, so everyone who's interested can look and read them in more details. Okay, so maybe we can take one or more questions for Boyan. Okay, so I guess if there's no more questions, we can go on with our third presentation, and I will give the word to Kate, and I guess as well as Radostina, and I see also Elena is here, so they can all talk and give their presentation. Thank you, Boyan, for the detailed answers and presentation as well. Kate or Radostina, I guess if you're talking, you're muted.
How's that? There we go. You hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay, very good. Okay, thank you, Petko, and thank you for this opportunity to present our study, which is very similar in terms of its scientific format to the study that Boyan just presented, in that it uses a quasi-experimental design with comparison groups and TFB groups and propensity score matching to try to enhance group comparability. The study was conducted by myself, Radostina Ангелова and Global Metrics, her staff at Global Metrics, and also Elena Schmidt, who did all of the analysis design and many of the analyses. So we'll be passing the baton back and forth a little bit as we discuss the study. Okay, so first of all, and I guess this kind of summarizes and follows on some of the previous discussion, why do we expect that there will be different impacts from TFB teachers than from teachers who have not gone through the TFB process? There are teacher selection factors. The TFB teachers generally have a university degree and other than education, real-world job experience. They're typically younger, have some experience with foreign travel and foreign languages, leadership potential, and gender balance. So we expect that the pool of teachers are really different. TFB teachers also experience intensive training and supervision, starting with a summer institute, observation of excellent classrooms, regular supervision and debriefing from the TFB coordinators, and performance evaluations. Also important is the support network that has developed as a community of TFB staff, alumni, and practitioners. I see also I need to apologize that for some reason you're not seeing my image. My Zoom camera says it's on, but it's not coming through. So apologies for the technology. So to begin, the study was framed by 3 principal evaluation questions. We did not look at value added or student performance, as was the topic of the previous study, but we felt that we needed to first address the question of how are TFB classroom practices different? How are TFB classrooms different from non-TFB classrooms? If there are no actual differences in the classrooms as they're experienced by students, there would be should be no expectation that there would be differences in the student performance attitudes or whatever is being measured. So we wanted to, and there had not been a study previously of actual practices in the classrooms. So we put a lot of effort and actually the bulk of the evaluation resources into determining if and how the practices in the TFB classrooms are different. So that was the classroom practices was the primary independent variable. Primary dependent variable, as shown number 2, is student socioeconomic, student socio-emotional impacts. The question is, do students grow in their socio-emotional skills in TFB classrooms? Now, these are skills that are shown in previous research to be related to effective learning, effective growth over time, and effective performance indeed after school has been completed. And if we could go on to the next slide. And the third one is impacts beyond the TFB classroom. Since, has been pointed out previously, TFB teachers are only a small part of the component of teachers in each school, although schools often have had more than one TFB teacher over a period of time. But since there's only one TFB teacher in a classroom, they may teach a number of classes, but still the bulk of the teachers in the school's contingent are probably had not had TFB training. So in order for the model to spread to the schools as a whole and to the country as a whole, there has to be some way for disseminating what TFB teachers are doing in the schools to other teachers. So we're looking for impacts of these teachers beyond the classroom, and such things as, do TFB teachers take leadership roles? Do they share TFB practices in the TFB vision? Do they recommend adoption of those things to other teachers and school-wide? And are TFB schools different in any observable way from non-TFB schools. So these are the principal variables. And I'm going to turn it over now to Radostina. And as you will see, these variables are turned into a fairly large number of topics and subvariables that become the ones to be measured in the study. So Radostina?
Hello from me. Yes, in fact, to answer all these questions, we had to develop very complex methodology in terms of instruments, but also sampling design, experimental design, and to cover the important elements and players who influence the learning process. So we did classroom observation protocols, and we did observation in both TFB and control sample of classes in order to see how different teaching practices are really implemented in TFB classes, but also to what extent some of them or similar of them exist in the control schools. Also, we did survey among students, mainly assessing students' social emotional skills. And this survey was with pre and post test covering the period of the evaluation from September of 2018 until June 2019 was the second wave. Meanwhile, also at the end of the school year, we did a survey among teachers and also school leaders. All these instruments are also complemented by qualitative instruments and methods. We did group discussions and in-depth interviews with teachers, and also group discussions with students to see some different aspects of the teaching environment and the teaching process, which verified and give different ground for our finding and conclusions. I will not go in details in sampling, but just to tell you that we did a lot of steps to assure the absolutely correct implementation of the research experiment in comparison between TFB and control group. Initially, before we started the evaluation, we did survey to identify control schools. By this, I mean to identify schools where first and second year teacher were available. Why I say this? Because of the specific of Bulgarian system and just the aging specific of teachers, it was not so easy to find comparative schools who are in the basic characteristics in terms of type of school, also socio-economic characteristic of the region or the community, and also results from external evaluation and exams to be similar to TFB. So we did this survey and a lot of statistical procedure to identify comparative sample and which perfectly match the TFB schools universe. In fact, we identified around 600 schools who are similar in characteristics, and after we continued to match them on all these elements which I explained, including also the ethnic profile of the region, economic profile of the region to settlement level, not to municipal level. And finally, we had our sample. I will not spend so much time, but just to tell you that this was very demanding and very specific procedure. Also, after we did a propensity score matching on individual level of students. Here, I should explain one obstacle we had because of, again, specific of our school system, and also specific of share of students who are absent from school. In fact, matching students who participated in pre-test and post-test, and to match them with control group, it was also serious technical procedure. And finally, we had the results of our evaluation with all these complex methodology and elements. The first element coming from classroom practices, we had very strong evidence that teachers from Tfb classes really implement the practices that are included as an element of the program, and in fact, in all Tfb classes, we can say that 39 of the classroom qualities and practices were significantly in favor of Tfb teachers, and did not exist to the same extent in the comparison sample. Of course, you can see we have 8 classroom qualities who are available in both type of schools, and there we don't have significant difference. At the same time, we were able to find out that students rate teachers of this classroom and of this classroom behavior in favor of Tfb, and students who are in the control group does not share the same experience and the same opinion. And here we have again significant difference in 12 out of 18 measured qualities based on the students' rating and students' opinion. When teachers rate themselves, we also have a significant difference between what Tfb teachers rate, and their rating is higher than those of the comparison teachers. But just to illustrate, we selected some of the findings from the observations. Here you have not individual items of observation, but summarized on the main categories for which we really observe statistically significant difference in favor of Tfb schools against the comparison schools. And we see that caring, conferring, captivating, consolidating, controlling, and challenging, all these key dimensions of our evaluation, each of them was measured by several behavior and teaching practices, are in favor of Tfb schools. I can tell you the only element which was equal or without significant, statistically significant difference among both groups was clarifying. So it shows us that in fact teachers in Tfb, but also in other schools, clarify and explain the teaching materials quite at the same intensive level. When we use students' rating to illustrate the difference, I choose here to go in more details. I hope it will not be boring for you. All presented are those elements who are in favor of Tfb sample. And here we can see that students think and share their opinion that Tfb teachers in vigorous extent explain the practical value of lessons for everyday life. They help, they explain and help to students and encourage them to participate in class, give chance to all students to participate. Also, here you can see that Tfb teachers develop positive environment and make students feel that this is a good place to learn, encourage them to try hard, to set goals, to expect them to do well. What I need to tell you here is that all the items are sorted on the difference between both samples. Here I will continue a little bit with what is the advantage of Tfb classes. The teachers in fact explain things clearly and make students to understand, keep them busy, also emphasize, keep them to review the key points, and students feel that they really learn interesting things in this class. But also teacher makes the lessons interesting. So it is a lot the result of the efforts and the approach which teachers in fact apply in the learning environment. And they encourage students to share their ideas and opinions. Also, self-rating, here we presented, in fact, the difference between pre and post-test and the teacher's self-rating. So we can see teachers, once again, I want to emphasize that these were first and second year teachers, so those who enter into the system, and that's also very important. Tfb teachers encourage students to use their past knowledge, develop very realistic planning with the pupils, and give them also feedback. What was the advantage, in fact, of this model of evaluation, that we split and we studied and evaluated many aspects of the learning process, and we measured how Tfb teachers, in fact, perform in this. So better management of time within the lesson, also they better solve conflicts if any such occur. Also, they diagnose and keep record for students' learning progress, and give feedback, discussing the mistakes, but also helping students to benefit from this discussion and from this feedback. Also, we really can observe that they develop positive environment, helping low achieving pupils to improve, to develop their skills and knowledge. And they try this with different instruments, different models of teaching, and different practices. I will go on the next slide. As far as I know, the detailed results are published, and if someone wants to go deeper, all these results are available. Now I give the floor to Keyt again to explain the other element of our evaluation, student social and emotional impacts.
Thank you, Radostina. Okay. Can you hear me? Oh, okay. For some reason, it's not showing up on my screen. Anyway, okay. So it was clear from this portion of the study that indeed Tfb classrooms taught by Tfb teachers were different from classrooms taught by comparison group teachers, and they were different along the lines of what is being promoted in the Tfb vision and the Tfb training. So it's clear that that training and the selection of candidates for Tfb classrooms is successful. However, that did not translate into effects that we could measure in the socio-emotional impacts among students. So we had devised a 60-item measure composed of items that came from a variety of sources that have been used in previous studies of the effectiveness of Teach for All programs. And those items held together well. We did a factor analysis of the 60 items, and the results supported the subscales that we had conceptually included in the instrument. However, there really was no significant difference starting at the item level between comparison students and TFB students. This was measured. The survey was implemented in a pre-test, post-test design. Pre-tests in October and the beginning of November, post-tests in May, and the gain scores were up and down. In fact, there were a number of cases where on each of the measures there was regression in both groups. In some cases, TFB students came out ahead, and some gained. In some cases, comparison students gained. The scores were just all over the map, so there was not a consistent result at the item level. Hence, it was fruitless to do any further analysis of subscores or multivariate analyses. So there really was no effect that could be measured on the student scores. The second source of data was the teacher survey, where teachers rated student growth over the course of the year in 16 areas, including socio-emotional skills. And there were no between group differences again. So there was no support there for the proposition of socio-emotional gain. If we go on to the next slide, there were a couple areas, and these could be just random. There are a couple areas where there were significant differences. Then they turned out to be areas where either there was a small gain among the TFB kids and a larger loss among the control kids. There are 2 cases of that, but these are only three measures out of 16. Or in one case, the control kids had a larger loss than the TFB kids. So that's really not an interpretable result. If we could go on now to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, so we're also very interested to know whether there were impacts of the TFB teachers beyond the TFB classrooms. Is there a dissemination? Is there spread from TFB classrooms out into the school? And to measure that, we used the teacher survey and school leader survey, which were post-test only instruments. So in these, teachers rated themselves higher than comparison teachers did. These are self-ratings of both groups on 3 of 13 leadership activities, including those 3 there. We'll look at these in a second too. And TFB teachers rated themselves higher on 5 of 8 professional development items. Comparison teachers weren't higher on any of these items, but there were just that about half of them were significantly higher for the TFB teachers. So there's some support there for that, for arguing that there are impacts beyond the TFB classroom. Now, down to the next point. When it came to the school leaders rating these same teachers on leadership and professional development, the results were strongly in favor of TFB, with significant differences on 17 of the 21 items. So school leaders were more strongly impressed by the development of TFB teachers than the teachers themselves were in their own ratings. Now, additionally, we had a unique opportunity, which just kind of happened in the design of the study. We had a number of both TFB principals and comparison group principals who had experience with both TFB teachers and non-TFB teachers. So this was a very interesting opportunity to have these principals rate the teachers on 15 qualities of effective teaching. These are qualities that are drawn from the general literature on effective teaching. And by both TFB and comparison school principals, TFB teachers were rated substantially higher on all items but subject matter and pedagogical knowledge, which we would expect, where the results were mixed. Now, if we could go to the next slide and take a look at, these are the specific items that were just discussed. These are the teacher self-ratings of on leadership and professional development. So you can see what that involves: proposing new ideas to school leaders, being mentored by another teacher, and so forth. TFB teachers are always higher on the self-ratings, and in some cases significantly so. Could we go on to the next slide, please? Okay, teachers' reflections on their own learning. Really don't have too much to say there. But could we go to the next one? This is the leaders, the school principals rating teachers on leadership and professional development. And many of these are, again, almost all in favor of the TFB teachers, and in many cases significant. And the final slide, these are the school leader ratings of TFB versus comparison teachers. So these are principals who have experience with both TFB and non-TFB teachers, rating them on various characteristics. TFB in this case being the red bar, and comparison teachers being the green bar. So we found these results to be pretty interesting. So overall, in terms of the quantitative results, very strong support for TFB classrooms being different from non-TFB classrooms. Really very limited support for TFB classrooms producing socio-emotional effects in students, and moderately strong support for the spread of good practices in schools based on TFB experience. Now, go to the next slide. Just spend a minute on this because we're probably going over time, but we did some qualitative studies, as Radostina indicated in the beginning. So there's one bullet there. So we did interviews of school leaders and teachers, individual interviews, and focus groups of students. There's a fair amount in the report. If you're interested in this, you see that what people had to say, and again, this is anecdotal because there wasn't any special selection made. We can't claim representativeness of this information, but you'll find that the information that's presented, an open-ended discussion from these folks, really reinforces the quantitative results that were presented above. And just as a final test, the last bullet there, as a final test to make sure we weren't missing anything in the socio-emotional data, we did extensive analyses of subgroups by grade level, by achievement level, by gender, and by the degree of exposure to TFB teachers, that is the number of teachers students had. And we had in our database students from as few as one teacher to as many as 4, I think was the top one. So we did, those results yielded no consistent findings of socio-emotional development based on group membership as segregated by those various subgroup characteristics. So we think that there just isn't anything in that data set to indicate such. So now to the discussion, and maybe we could open it to Elena Schmidt was not involved in preparing this presentation, but she may want to add something. She's been involved with the TFB project for a long time, has more experience than any of us. Is there anything you would like to add, Elena?
Oh, thanks, Keyt. Not much to add. I think you did a wonderful job overviewing the program. I would just like to say that was really interesting to be involved at this stage of the evaluation, and after observing and supporting the program for its early years and getting ready to the point where we could launch an evaluation like that. And it was still very much, I think, even though we have some really interesting summative results, it was still very much a formative evaluation in how much we learned about the model, how much we learned about the work that's happening, as well as using these results as a stepping stone for even deeper insight into the impact of the organization. I hope that our work together was certainly very educational to me, but I also hope and believe that it inspired a lot of program level decisions and conversation about looking at the model, looking at the implementation of the training and everything else that's ongoing, which is always in my mind one of the best effects of a strong evaluation. The successes that it shows in terms of knowledge and skills and cognitive and non-cognitive impacts in the participants are always nice, but I think the true value comes when it's done in partnership with a program that's willing to really learn from the conclusions, which is something that I certainly felt was happening in our work, and I hope to see more of that in the future.
Thank you, Elena. Radostina, did you have anything to add?
No, for me it is very, very good when I see that in addition to the quantitative methods, qualitative methods give us assurance that there is absolutely coherence in observation finding, and this is quite the best situation when you feel very confident of the findings, because combining both methods and all the elements of the evaluation, in fact, were gave us opportunity to give clear messages.
Okay, thank you. Well, let's turn it back to Petko for questions.
Thank you, Keyt and Radostina and Elena. So let's see. Again, we have a question from Yana. The measurements, are they a given, or you derived to them organically through conversation with students and teacher? And I would also be interested in organic statements. Also, were there any negative behaviors we are trying to prevent through Teach for Bulgaria?
Well, let me start with that. Radostina and Elena may have something to add. We began this evaluation with
Keyt, you had
couldn't hear you.
Or you got dropped like I did earlier. I can take on this question a little bit until Keyt comes back. We started the evaluation not completely from scratch, instrument and measurement wise. We used a lot of the research that's available, as well as the fact that Teach for Bulgaria had been using some established measurements of socio-economic skills in particular, as well as classroom observations. You know, we didn't have a blank slate, which was great. So we were inspired by a lot of the pre-existing instruments, certainly a lot of research out there that has been done with validated scales and measurements. And we borrowed heavily and extensively. We adapted some of that. None of the instruments that we used were necessarily things that we established psychometric qualities through pilot studies, although we did do some of that on a smaller scale. And most importantly, I think the biggest adaptation that we did was that we adapted them to the local context. We adapted them to what the program was actually trying to do and what we were most interested in studying. Many of the translations reflected that they weren't literal or verbatim translations from English because they were much more appropriately contextualized. in terms of, I think, again, going back to what I said about this evaluation being a partnership, I think one of the most valuable aspects of these instruments was that they were developed in very close collaboration, and it was an iterative process between us as the evaluation team and the program leaders as the folks doing the work. In my opinion, and I think many in the field share that there's a lot of value to that, even if it comes at the cost of messing, for lack of a better word, with a validated instrument that is off the shelf and has been studied and tested in a different context and produced. Sometimes people would caution against, let's not change the questions too much, but I think our deviations from those instruments were always positive and always for the better. It definitely contributed a lot to the study. I can't speak much to the negative behaviors that we were trying to prevent through the Teach for Evaluation, through the evaluation. I think we, this is probably a question better addressed by the program folks, but in terms of trying to mitigate some of the risks with evaluation, we were always very sensitive to the confidential nature of the work, to the burden that it imposes on people in terms of both time and effort. And so we applied a lot of best practices for data collection, observation, and data analysis in terms of not wanting this to be associated with any negative experiences for any of the participants. Radostina, you and your team was very heavily involved in the translation and the launching of the instruments. So I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add to Joanna's response.
Yes, just I want to recall that before implementing this evaluation, we had kind of analysis of to what extent the program is, how the theory of change, what kind of evaluation is appropriate for this model of the program. And we did a lot of group discussions, interviews with students, teachers in both groups, and this helped us also to find how different items and instruments are suitable, relevant, but also how to adapt. We did piloting, which is absolutely necessary step, but this helped us to see how the instruments will work in reality. And even we must be absolutely honest that we did a huge adaptation for the instruments to be understandable by young groups, and we had different instruments for students who are third and fourth grade, because their level of ability to understand such abstract elements and thoughts were not the same, and we had to adapt the instrument to their cognitive skills. So in this sense, yes, we did a lot of how to say, as Ioana formulated it quite organically, taking the real way the teachers and students speak and think about the learning environment and practices.
Thanks so much, both. Really good. Thank you. Very clear.
And here we have 3 questions that are quite similar. So I'm just going to read them through. They're all related to the social emotional competencies. So are there any clues to why social emotional competencies are not being positively affected by TFB teachers? And then the other 2 questions from Ivo and Boyan are, you recommended more in-depth methods for measuring social emotional skills. What do you mean by that? And from Boyan, what methods of measuring social emotional skills would you use in school environment beyond the usual scale, relying on self-reporting?
Keyt, I don't know if you want to start with that. I have so many thoughts and opinions. This is definitely a bit of an expertise and interest of mine, but Keyt, I defer to you if you want to kind of start with a big overview to this question. And you're on mute. Or maybe not even back. So I can talk for a bit on that. Social and emotional skills in terms of measurement is a really fascinating area. It obviously has its origins back in psychology and back in the 70s, but only recently has it become integrated in school context as part of the science of learning, and why we want to measure those, why we want to record them and monitor and affect them, you know, has been connected only in the past decade or so to educational outcomes. I was really excited when our Teach for Bulgaria partners shared that this is going to be a new and increased emphasis and focus of the program, of the teacher training, as well as the classroom implementation of the model. So in our evaluation, even though it was early on in the stages of the actual programmatic work, we really wanted to pay close attention to these very important skills, as well as constructs and concepts. So we were, from the beginning, realistic and anxious in knowing that these kind of effects are, one, very difficult to grasp through surveys, and two, take quite a bit of intensive work and longitudinal observation to notice change in them. So I think that our conclusion at the end of it, and our observation, our qualitative results, and all the conversations with the program, as well as different stakeholders, absolutely indicated that important work in that domain is happening, that teachers are shifting their focus to it. Students are responding in ways in which they are building stronger, better relationships, as well as more resilience and motivation as a result of working with Teach for Bulgaria. But the self-reported quantitative measures were not quick to reflect on that. Sampling, as well as other methodological issues, I think were secondary, but I think the primary answer there is that this is the kind of work that takes years, takes 3 to 5 years. It is consistent with what human development shows, and child development and youth studies show, that these are the kind of concepts and constructs that take years to develop through relationship building with adults. A student's motivation is so deeply embedded in their identity that we can't expect that it changes overnight in a meaningful and lasting manner, even though it fluctuates day by day, obviously, how motivated you are to show up to school. In terms of your motivation for long-term education, that's really the work of many, many months and many people. So the lesson that we learned is parallel to what the field overall is learning, that we need to be much more patient, both as people trying to affect the change and as people trying to measure it. And we need to be very targeted and very specific as to what the work is trying to accomplish, so that you know, the field of social emotional learning is very broad, and there are many, many constructs that are important to well-developed whole child pedagogy. But programs, individual teachers, schools, and districts and communities cannot tackle all of them at once and expect to see results across the spectrum very, very quickly. So much like if you're trying to teach cognitive skills, the best results often come from systematic focused work in one area. The same applies to social and emotional learning. So I've been very encouraged and really, really happy to see that our work together has prompted the Teach for Bulgaria program to really kind of tighten the focus, think very critically about what they're trying to emphasize with teachers and what teachers are bringing to the classroom. And I'm very positive and extremely optimistic in knowing that the results will show up eventually, both in our measurements as well as in the classroom and in the lives of students.
And if I can add something, we really think that the time spent with Tfb teacher is not so much, because you can imagine one student have 2 or 3 times per week lesson with Tfb teacher, and after all the rest of the classes are with other teachers. So the time, the exposure, and the time that someone can work on this with students, in fact, it's not so intense, and it needs quite accumulation of this exposure to see better results.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your answers and your presentation. And I guess I will wrap it up here because we are already a little bit over time. And first, I just want to again thank for all of the researchers and their presentations. Thank you all for joining. And I also want to mention some of the peer reviewers that helped finish the reports. I'll just mention them. Ariel Lindorf, Jules Delat, Anna Choi, Dmitry Vasiliev, and Mikhail Yanchev. Thanks to their comments, I guess the reports were definitely better, and the researchers were extremely open for the feedback, and then they included most of the comments and suggestions. So I guess the final results were quite good. And again, thank you all for supporting Teach for Bulgaria. Again, thanks so much for participating, and I guess I will send the recording and additional materials tomorrow. In the meanwhile, if you have any additional questions that pop up, feel free to write them to me, and I'll make sure to that you get an answer. Again, thank you all, and have a good night.
Thank you.